Welcome, everyone. Good evening. My name is Meredith Jacobs. I am the CEO of Jewish Women International. I want to thank you for joining us this evening on a very important conversation on women and freedom and a discussion of current events in Iran. I'm sure if you're here, you are following the news and what's happening. Before we begin, I want to thank Goldie Davoudgoleh, who is a leader of one of JWI's Young Women's Impact Networks in Boston. It was Goldie who came to us and said, what can we do to raise awareness of this issue, to speak out? In JWI's 125 years, we are always involved with issues impacting women and girls around the globe. We work with a vision of a world that is free of violence and inequity, where women and girls can thrive. Internationally, we are part of the UN's Commission on the Status of Women and Girls, and we work on such advocacy issues as the International Violence Against Women Act. Our work falls into three buckets: ending interpartner violence, ensuring access to long-term economic security, and lifting women to leadership positions. We are thrilled and honored to be partnering with JIMENA for this important conversation. And with that, I really want to turn things over to my colleague, Matthew Nouriel, who will introduce the work of their organization, and we can open up to this important conversation. But thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Meredith. It's really an honor to be here and to be a partner with your wonderful organization on this. My name is Matthew Nouriel. I'm the Community Engagement Director at JIMENA. JIMENA is an acronym for Jews Indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa. We were established about 20 years ago by Mizrahi Jewish refugees with the mission of achieving universal recognition of the heritage, history, and rights of the nearly 1 million indigenous Jewish refugees from the Middle East and North Africa and their Mizrahi and Sephardic descendants. To learn more about us, please head over to jimena.org or follow us on social media at @Jimena_voice. We're honored to be a partner on this wonderful event. It's an important event, and it's about an issue which is very near and dear to me personally, as I myself am Iranian. Without further ado, I'll introduce our wonderful panelists tonight. Firstly, we have Rabbi Tarlan Rabizadeh. She is the Vice President for Jewish Engagement at American Jewish University and the Director of the Mosque Center for Jewish Journeys. We have Dr. Houman Sarshar. He is an independent scholar, a consulting editor, and a contributing author to the Encyclopedia Iranica, as well as a contributing author to the Encyclopedia of Jews in the Islamic World. And finally, we have Dr. Sharona Nazarian, who is a community leader, philanthropic advocate, and a City of Beverly Hills elected council person. And lastly, I'll introduce our moderator, Goldie Davoudgoleh. She's a JWI Boston board member. Goldie, please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew and Meredith, so much for helping us kick off the night and framing such an important conversation with us. And so I'm really honored and privileged to be here speaking with some of our great leaders in the Iranian Jewish community. And I know each of you have your own connection to what's going on right now, personally, through your professional life, academic life. And so for those in the audience who may not necessarily know about the history of Jews in Iran, Houman, I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of background on what it has been like for Jews in Iran in the past and other minority groups.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. But the story of Iranian Jews is about 2,700 years, so we won't go back that far. But suffice it to say that from the time of their arrival on the Persian plateau, and the real mass migration of Iranian Jews to Iran after the liberation of Babylon, they have remained consistently the largest community of Jews in the Middle East throughout these 2,500 years outside of Israel. And while their situation socially, politically, legally has vacillated a lot over the years. One of the biggest downfalls, I guess, that they encountered was in the 1501, when the Shiite creed of Islam became the dominating form of Islam in Iran. And in part, in order for the Shiite clergy to encourage conversion to Shiism, they created a law of religious impurity. And for reasons that are still very much under debate, Jews were the ones that were most associated with this religious impurity, and their touch was considered impure, and it created all sorts of problems. There were legal restrictions put on them in terms of where they could live and how they could live in a Jewish community. And this made them, for the most part, second-class citizens in Iran all the way until 1906, when the first constitutional revolution anywhere in the Middle East happened in Iran. And according to Article 8, officially changed the historic second-class citizenship position of Iranian Jews and made them regular citizens of Iran. Given the tremendous historical burden that went with being an Iranian Jew, it took a while for the social attitudes to change, but by and large, by 1941, when the last ruling monarch, the Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, the last king that everybody knows as the Shah, took over, it started really a golden age of Iranian Jewry, where in a very short span of time, in under 20 years, Jews witnessed an astronomical rise to power in terms of social mobility, financial mobility, legal freedoms, to be able to become very, very active, very important key figures in the development of a modern Iran. And this all came to a shrieking halt in 1978 with the revolution, especially and particularly with the murder of Haj Habib el-Ghanayan, who was one of the leading figures of the Jewish community, a very wealthy industrialist who was the head of the Jewish organization in Iran. And he was basically captured at 4 p.m. in his home one afternoon and taken to Evin prison and trialed. By 7 p.m., his trial had started. The trial, I think, lasted 25, 30 minutes. He was accused of treason as a Zionist, as a Jew, and by 3:30 or 4 o'clock the following morning, so about 14, 15 hours after his arrest, he was executed. And this sent a very, very frightening message throughout the Jewish community and led to what remains one of the largest exodus of Jews from Iran in the last several hundred years. Since then, Jews, though they live in Iran under all of the same legal rights as other people, though in some respects things are limited, there hasn't been too many complications. There's one or two, but our time is limited, so we won't discuss them. But for the most part, they've lived as regular Iranian citizens, so long as they don't travel to Israel, because the passport of the Islamic Republic actually has a page in the back that strictly prohibits the holder of the passport from traveling to occupied Palestine, which is how the Islamic Republic refers to Israel. And, so they have remained part of society as long as, they kind of keep their heads down and do their thing. My understanding is that currently, I don't know that too many of them are participating in the activities because it's simply too risky. As a Jew, it's too easy for the Islamic Republic to accuse you of Zionism. So they're sitting this one out, but like every other Iranian who is fighting for freedom in Iran, they are guaranteed to benefit from the from a free society, from this free society that we all hope to see emerge in Iran soon.
Yeah, thank you for giving that background. I think it's so important to highlight kind of what life looked like up until the late 1970s. And given that, I'm curious, I know Sharona and Rabbi Tarlan, you both also have family stories of how your family came to the US from Iran. And I'm wondering if you can touch a little bit on your personal family stories and how they got out of Iran at the time.
Sure, Rabbi, go ahead.
This is what we call a tarof in Farsi. You know, we go through like 20 seconds of wrestling. Sure. I mean, I can go. I mean, I think one thing that Dr. Sarshar just said really brought to mind is that, you know, there's been some also messages going out for the Persian community in Iran right now, saying things like encouraging people not to protest or be part of the uprising. And I think it's really important for us to remember, whether there's, you know, Ashkenazim in the room or, you know, being Jewish in this world is a precarious state in most places, especially being Jewish in a you know, a Jewish minority and a Muslim majority. And so we shouldn't always necessarily believe and take what people are saying to heart, right? So these people are saying that, but they might be saying it for their own protection. And I don't think in any way that they are actually telling people to not go against the revolt. And the other thing I'll just say quickly before I promise I'll answer your question, which is that this is fascinating what Dr. Sarshar just said about what's, you know, people not being able to go in their passports, it says, and, you know, you become sort of occupying Palestine. I didn't know that. I will say that ever since I started posting things on social media, people in Iran have texted me and said things to me like, please help us. See if Hayes can help us. They just took our passports away. We were trying to get to Israel and now we can't. And there's just, you know, people getting, you know, messaging us. So there's so much. I'll say for my family really quickly, my parents happened to be in America when the revolution happened, like most of their cousins and friends, the people their age. People didn't really necessarily go to university in Iran. You had to be like a top student to get into school, I understand. So people, it was, you know, my grandparents' generation, you know, people left to go to all over the world. My parents' generation for college, they came to the United States. Many of them engineering degrees, having to do with oil, wanting to go back to Iran and utilize those degrees. But of course, they stayed. My grandparents came later. I was maybe 1 when I met my grandparents. You know, so some people came later. A lot of people were also mamnun khuruj. They weren't allowed to leave the country based on, you know, if they had money, especially, and if they had any means. You know, there was a hold on that, and they didn't want anyone to leave. So sort of different stories of people who, like my parents, who never got to go back and really say goodbye and left at a really sweet age, maybe in high school where they said goodbye and they thought they were coming back. And then my grandparents and great aunts and uncles who saw some of the horrible things that happened firsthand and don't want to go back. So.
All right. So first of all, thank you to JWI and to JIMENA for this invitation. I kind of have almost the same experience. It's interesting when Houman was explaining the history of the Iranian people. I'm like, yes, that's exactly what we went through. My dad was educated as an engineer in Iran. He met my mom in the United States. He went to school in the United States, and when they became pregnant, when my mom was pregnant, we came back to Iran, and he was working in an oil refinery in Iran. He was doing very well. He was educated in Texas, so he had a lot of experience. And because he was listening to BBC and he was understanding a lot of what was happening in the news, he realized that it wasn't a good time for us to be there. So my mom, my brother, and I left for Israel, and Israel sort of served as our safe haven when we left. And after he left, after he was able to salvage what he could from the life that they had started there, he moved to Israel, and he said, you know, I just barely got through learning English. It's very difficult to learn Hebrew to be able to conduct business. So we moved back to Texas. And when he was originally seen as like this tall, dark, and handsome man, he was all of a sudden seen as a terrorist. And those were kind of the words that were being used. And we ended up moving to Los Angeles and built a home there. We were one of the first in our family to move to the United States. And soon after, everyone followed through, most of them using Israel as the pathway to be able to come through and start a new life here in the United States.
Thank you both for sharing. I think I see very similar sides to both of your stories and my family stories, where my father came to the US to go to school as well. And when he was here, it was right before the revolution. And then over the following like 10, 20 years, he helped his entire family move to Los Angeles as well. And he also became an engineer. So I feel like that ties everyone's stories together. So I think we should pivot and talk about really what we're here to talk about today, and kind of focus on what is happening in Iran right now. I think a lot of us may know at this point the name Mahsa or Jina Amini, and I'm wondering if Rabbi Tarlan, you can kind of introduce what has been going on over the last, I think it's today's 81 days since her death. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what happened to her and what her death has kind of sparked in the Iranian people over the last 2 or 3 months.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I think it's all of our jobs to sort of amplify those voices because, as you know, we don't have people on the ground. And so the people's, at home videos, so to speak, are really what's coloring what's happening. Mahsa Jina Amini was a Kurdish Iranian woman. She was 22 years old. The story goes that she was actually visiting Tehran with her brother. And there is as many of you might know, there's a law in Iran, as a lot of Muslim countries, to cover your hair with a head covering, a hijab. Apparently the Gasht Irshad, the morality police, Iran has a morality police. It's sort of like a government officials that walk around and ensure that people are, women especially, are not wearing too tight clothing, dressed properly. There's no drinking because alcohol is prohibited. They do a lot of things. And at this point, they apparently see a piece of her hair outside of her head covering, though there are some reports that say it was because her ankles were showing. Nevertheless, the story goes that she was taken to a detention center. We don't know what happened on the way there, but what we do see is that there's a camera that's sort of spotlights her in a waiting room. And she sort of leans on a chair, trying to muster the strength to sort of hold herself up. And then within seconds, she just collapses. And she goes to the hospital and she goes into a coma. And she dies 3 days later. And the understanding is that she was beaten so ruthlessly and mercilessly by the morality police that she dies. And so the Iranian people, rightfully so, take to protest. They're in outrage. I mean, you see at the beginning, waking up to daily posts of women just in act of defiance, taking off their hijab, their head covering, and burning it in like bonfires, almost like in large like piazzas. They don't have quite piazzas in Iran like we do in Italy, or but it's like that. It was like everyone was out there, and it was men and women and people who identify however, coming out and just saying, we're sick of this. We're sick of what's happening in these last 43 years since 1979. Yeah, I mean, is that good? I mean, I can say more. I mean, it's funny because we've been sitting on panel after panel, Dr. Sarshar and I, on one just last night. And so one of the things that was really brought up was the fact that, it's led by women, and it's also fueled by Gen Z. And these are people that never had a taste of freedom ever. And so the reason that it's so strong is because they have nothing to lose. They've never lived a full life. And so, they're on social media, the Gen Z generation, they see the freedoms that people have around the world, and they're freaking tired of it. And so that's their power. That's their strength, because they are unarmed. They are unarmed against an armed tyrant, people in uniforms and officials from all over. So I think, yeah, I mean, that's the picture I can paint at this point in the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I think that helps to give some context maybe for people who know that something's going on, but they maybe haven't been following as closely as, maybe we have. Um, and I just want to plug quickly before we continue. If anyone in the audience has a question, we have the Q&A box open and we'll have some time at the end. So if there's something that you wanted to review or you didn't understand or you had tons more curiosities about, please put it in the Q&A. And so, sorry, to get back to what we were talking about before. I know that this past week has brought a lot of news updates, or what we thought were news updates about what's going on in Iran, relating to the UN voting on an investigation, relating to what's coming out about the morality police that doesn't seem to be true. And also, I know that there were some recent killings of the government against some individuals who seem to allegedly been conspiring with Israel. And so I'm wondering if, anyone who, this question is open to all, but if you can tell us a little bit about what's been going on in the most recent events and kind of what this means for the status of the revolution.
Well, those are all really big questions. I think that what has had the UN decision is absolutely brilliant and should be loudly applauded. We've been waiting for a long time for this to happen. For those of us who know Iran, who follow it, for me, it's been a daily event for not just 90 days, but for 44 years. What is currently happening in Iran is not so shocking. I think what the magnitude is, but the reality is that this has been going on for 44 years. And it's high time that the UN finally started these investigations. The prosecutions that you refer to and the murders, I guess, I don't even know what else to call them. The two young boys who were murdered in Mashhad with the accusations of Zionism, it just goes to show you the way this government operates, which is that not a single word of truth ever comes out of it. I mean, it really, the term fake news is something that has really entered American discourse only in the last 5 years, but it's something that Iranians have been living with for 44 years. There's never, ever been a true story that has ever come out of this government's propaganda machine, including the most recent one of shutting down the morality police so that people will no longer be under their surveillance. And what this all means, I guess, from one perspective in terms of the revolution, I think it can only escalate the inevitable. There's a 3-day protest and strike, general strike started in Iran today. And I spent, I think, a good 2 hours of my morning just posting video after video after video of every single village, town, and metropolis in Iran, showing everything is shut down. Everyone is on board with this revolution, and this government really has no place to go. Honestly, I believe that if the condition of this government were the same as the condition of the previous government in 1978, where we all just, for the most part, got on a plane with a passport and went elsewhere to figure out what we were going to do. If these people had the same option, this would already be over, but nobody wants them. They can't go anywhere, so they're stuck, which is also probably why they are getting increasingly aggressive in their opposition to the freedom fighters. But I think they're just desperately buying themselves maybe an extra few hours or few days, because this thing is not turning back, and there's really only one way it's going to end. So.
Yeah, for sure. I think that I totally agree. And I'm curious, what do you as Jewish Iranians who are living outside of Iran, what do you think that these protests that, as we just heard, are still going on today, what does this mean for the future of Iran? Do you believe that there's hope for regime change and like a change in values of the government? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
My biggest hope is that something worse doesn't replace the Islamic Republic as it stands now. And my biggest hope, that's my biggest fear. And my biggest hope is that it'll create better ties, more unity, being able to have better ties with Israel and abroad.
I'm curious, Sharona, and even Dr. Sarshar, do you think that there's a possibility that it could be worse? That someone could step in and make, I mean, I guess there's always room for worse.
Everything is possible. But a word of caution that I would like to remind everyone here or share with you is that the idea that Iranians should fear the elimination of the Islamic Republic because there's either a vacuum of people to govern, or the only thing that could happen is that it's going to get worse, is one that's been propagated by the Islamic Republic for 44 years in order precisely to preempt an uprising. The videos that are coming out of Iran are frankly showing us that there are college students who are so brilliant, so keenly understanding what it means to govern, what democracy is all about, what an ideal society looks like, that I, for one, have absolutely no concern that there's going to be plenty of candidates to run this government. You need 270 parliamentarians and a few other people to run the government. It is impossible for me to imagine that for a country that has the highest literacy rate of women anywhere in the world, you're not going to be able to find 270, say 500 out of the 78 million that are there who are going to be able to do a better job than 12 clergy Shiites, who none of whom have higher than a 6th grade education. I just find that impossible to believe. So while I appreciate and I understand Sharona's concern, I don't share it. I'm very optimistic, and I think that the future of Iran is going to be a glorious one. We're probably going to head towards a secular parliamentarian republic, where just to give a historic perspective to this, this is the 3rd revolution that's happening in Iran in 120 years. And each one has only wanted the same thing: democracy, and full democracy, full parliamentarian democracy in Iran. And I believe that this 3rd one will succeed predominantly because of the female element and the female energy and the women who are participating in it very loudly and making their voices heard with agency.
Rabbi Tarlan, I don't know if you wanted to, add your voice or
No, I'm good. I mean, on this one, this was
sure.
Good. Yeah.
Sure.
Next one.
I'm curious, Houman, if you've seen any leaders amongst those who are out protesting and who are at the forefront of what's going on right now, who might eventually rise to be those like more official leaders down the line.
I've seen plenty of them. I will refrain cautiously and knowingly from naming them, because I don't think that it's time to start worrying about who's going to lead. I think another one of the beauties of this revolution is that the people are the leader. The collective synchronicity that has happened among Iranians across this planet is mind-boggling. I honestly don't think that you can find a similar scenario in human history. Granted, people didn't have iPhones back in the Greek ages, but the harmony and the unity that has developed almost overnight among Iranians, who are also showing the world that the people of Iran are a very different thing than the Islamic Republic, which is a colonizing government led by a couple of few thousand individuals who are only interested in stuffing their pockets and pillaging the country. You know, it's just a phenomenal thing to see. I'm sorry, remind me your question again?
I just was curious about if you saw any leaders emerging, and you
Oh,
said
the leaders.
you wanted
Yes.
to refrain from
Refrain from,
making any,
yes. I think it's too soon, and I think those leaders are already showing themselves, and they will come up. You know, that one of the reasons why the concern that there may not be any leaders or who's going to come and take their place is that over the last 44 years, anyone who's shown the capacity to lead has been eliminated by the Islamic Republic. So the one thing people have learned is that those leaders who are amongst us have learned to just keep a low profile until it's safe to come out of hiding. And I'm confident that they are there and that they will bring this ship home.
Yeah, that sounds hopeful to me, because as someone who might not know or know how to identify those as individuals who could become leaders, it's good for me to hear that it sounds like there are those individuals who will rise up when the time is right.
Listen, let me put it to you this way. When the revolution happened, about 1 million Iranians came to the United States. Currently, there's about 1.1 million of us here. I don't think there is a city with a major Iranian population where you can walk around, just literally randomly walk around the street and mention Iranian, and people aren't going to know someone who has somehow impacted their community or their society in a very, very, very large and meaningful way. We are disproportionately represented in terms of education. We are disproportionately represented in terms of the wealth we have generated, not wealth we brought, wealth we have generated. The impacts of Iranian in Silicon Valley, the impacts of Iranian in Hollywood, the impacts of Iranian in banking, medicine, you name it. This 1 million people in a country of 300 million has managed to show themselves like an exceptional generation of immigrants into this country. And there are 80 million of us back in Iran. So have every confidence in the world that Iran is perfectly fine, and there will be more than enough people to manage its situation and manage its country when the chains are taken off and they're allowed to do so.
I think as Iranians, especially as Iranian Jews, we've also been taught to keep our head down and not be involved. So we are active in so many, and I always touch upon this too, that we are active and we touch upon so many different aspects of our of community life, except in politics. And we don't have enough elected officials. So I always try to encourage people to get involved. Iranians have a lot of opinions, but oftentimes they don't take the time to let their voice be heard. And that's always been my message. Educate yourselves, understand the politics of it, and get involved to be a voice for your community.
Sharona, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that as a local council member in Beverly Hills, and talk about how you've been able to integrate, what's going on in Iran and across the world into your work, and what that means to like be an advocate in your world.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm the first Iranian American female to be elected to Beverly Hills City Council, and never in my wildest dreams did I think that I would be representing our community as it relates to Iran. So it's been a very humbling position to be in. And right before we started this discussion, I was telling Houman, I really grew up in the United States. If you ask me about governing in Beverly Hills or what's going on, I know plenty about that, but it's really been a process learning about Iran as well, and what's going on over there. But what I do know is that this is a basic human rights issue. So when I do speak on the matter, I do say that it's not cultural, it's not religious, but it is about basic human rights. And I always make it a point to mention that I am Jewish, because I want to share that it's important for us to have solidarity, for us to have unity. And a lot of times you hear differing views and differing perspectives, but at the end of the day, we want to have the same thing. We want to have a free Iran. We want to be able to allow for them to have a voice for themselves. And this is the first revolution that has actually been started by an Iranian woman, by Iranian women and Shirzans. And so that's, their courage is just liberating. I think it's had such an incredible impact on throughout the world. It's become a global impact. So you don't necessarily have to be Iranian to understand this fight and this global movement. And it's really awe-inspiring what the Iranian women have been able to achieve in such a short period of time. And Houman, I am hopeful, and I do think that there are brilliant minds in Iran. And yeah, I think that of course we all want a free Iran. So I don't want my comment to have come out the wrong way.
Not at all. I hear you loud and clear.
Something I think about in terms of your fear, Sharona, is especially you and, you know, my father's generation and his family, they have all this built up trauma from what has already happened in Iran. And so it totally makes sense that could be your like knee-jerk reaction of, I don't want something like worse to happen again. And so it totally makes sense to me. And also I think at the same time, we have to be hopeful, or else it can really lead us down a dark path, especially being outside of what's going on and not always knowing what's true, what's really happening, who's there, what's, you know. So I think to hold hope is also really important. And so, yeah, please.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to turn us to the next question, so go ahead.
Well, before we go to the next question, listen, I think a small historical perspective will hopefully help reinforce both of your hopes. Because this fight in Iran is not 81 days old, and it's not 44 years old. It's in fact 170 years old. The Iranian people, starting in the mid-1800s, in 1850-51, when the encounter with the West really got exaggerated and Iranians started to become very familiar with the way they were being seen through Western eyes, they decided that they absolutely needed to bring some foundational changes to their community and their society, namely with respect to the position of women. Because Westerners were having all sorts of thoughts about Iranians, because the women were always hidden in the homes and hidden under veils. So there was a huge movement that was going on to unveil women and to allow women the same freedoms and liberties that Iranians thought women had in the West, which, even though their fantasies were incorrect, were definitely more freedoms than they had in Iran. At the same time, the clergy back then, they managed the courts, managed the entire education system, and had a lot of clout in Iran in terms of governance and power, did not want to give up this fight, because unveiling women meant exactly what the clergy is saying today is the end of Islam. So this battle between veiled women and unveiled women in Iranian society has been going on for 170 years. In 1921, a very famous Iranian singer named Qamarolmuluk Vaziri came on stage and was the first woman to actually on stage. She had a wardrobe malfunction. She removed her veil, and it created a scandal that went down in the history books. They had to come, like literally police showed up to remove her from stage. She had to sign, you know, a promissory note saying that I'm never going to do this again in order for them to release her. And she was a very famous singer even then. So the reason people tend to get a little hopeless is that we have multi-generational failures of what has attempted to become a democratic nation that includes freedoms for women. once in 1906, it kind of failed. And then the revolution in 1978 was about to go there. And then the clergy hijacked it and it became worse. So we have reasons, we have legitimate historical reasons to fear the worst. However, what is different this time is that it's the first time, not only in 170 years of Iranian history, but it's the first time in human history that women are standing up and leading the charge for a revolution against patriarchal hegemony and saying enough is enough. We are sick and tired of having men decide what we wear, what we eat, what we're allowed to do, what we're allowed to practice as jobs, and the freedoms we're allowed to have. This time, we're going to make our own decisions. And this is what gives me unwavering hope that this time we're not going to fail. This time Iran is going to succeed because we have finally, not only have we allowed space for women to talk, but we are actually following their voices. And I think that following this female, feminine voice, female energy into this fight against patriarchal hegemony is the absolute most winning, power-winning tool we have in our hands, and we are determined to see the end. And I think we will.
That was very inspiring. Thank you. I loved hearing that little bit of hope coming in from you as well. Rabbi Tarlan, I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how the Jewish community, I know you're all located in LA, so your focus might be the LA County, but how you see the Jewish community has reacted to the events in Iran, whether it be through federation, organization, academia, and what's the overall feeling from the Jewish community, especially the Iranian Jewish community, about what's going on?
Great question. I think I'm going to start with your second question. I think, as we all sort of alluded to, I think there's different generations and different waves who have different ideas of hope and what's going to come out of this. I think that a lot of people are really rooting, especially millennials and Gen Zers, people in my generation who just really believe that, if we just amplify those voices, like who knows whose hands social media is going to get into and what kind of music artist or politician or activist is going to see something and want to raise, and amplify the Iranian people's voices and really help create change, whether it's putting pressure on our governments or what. So there's a difference. And then there's people like my grandparents' age who just are just saddened by the death tolls and are thinking to themselves, this is all going to end in vain, God forbid. And so I'm glad you pivoted with the word of hatikva and hope with the Jewish question, because I think it's really important for us in times of darkness to really have hope. Now, here's the issue. What was the first part of your question? You're muted.
I was on mute. Talking about how the general Jewish community has reacted,
Right.
Not just the specific Iranian.
I'll be really honest. It's been really challenging for me. I will say that, I talked to various different organizations about posting something about what happened in Iran within weeks. And they asked me how this is a Jewish problem. And it was too shocking for me to respond. And then I remembered coming back to it and saying, is Ukraine a Jewish problem? We're posting about Ukraine. I understand why we post about Kanye. That's a Jewish problem. But are we posting about Ukraine because Zelensky is Jewish, or because there's more Jews in Ukraine, or frankly, is this a racist issue? I've battled things on the side head on. It's been really hard, especially for, this happened weeks before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and then Sukkot. And it was like, no rabbi was talking about it. I had maybe like 2 or 3 rabbis who just made a general comment in between their services. Like, we're in a dark place, Ukraine, Iran. And it's been really challenging because, as you alluded to, LA is, affectionately known as Tehrangeles because of the large, vast number of Iranians that live here, both Jewish and Muslim, it stretched all the way to Orange County. So it's been really heartbreaking for all of us to really to just, I guess, be raised in a city where we've always just had such a big number of a majority, and we've never really been seen in so many ways, not in the rituals, not in the culture, and then not even have a rabbi or people just announce something. And people feel that, just putting out a statement like, we're in solidarity with the Iranian people is enough. It's like, that's not enough. And thank you so much for sending out a statement 3 months ago. That's not enough. And so it's been really, really challenging to have those conversations. And I hate to say it in those terms, but people have to realize that it's not enough. And one of the things I keep asking people is to just engage in the conversation, ask us what we can do, learn about it. I just, that's all, and the last thing I'll say is I had a few people last week ask me who Mahsa Amini was, and it's not to blame anything. It's to say that it's really not hitting everybody's feed the way we think it is. Like, I wake up every day because my family is Persian and my friends, I have Persian friends, and people are posting, but like, there are Jews, there are people who are not following this story at all. And so as much as I've said, Mahsa Amini for like the 50th time, there are people who might have heard it for the first time this evening. And I think it's really important that we continue to amplify.
Yeah, Rabbi Tarlan, I share a lot of your sentiments, especially as being an Iranian Jew outside of LA and having to navigate, trying to have those conversations in my community, where this feels like something very near and dear to my heart and to my family. And in a lot of ways that puts me and us as individuals who live in a broader community, in a broader Jewish community, as really the educators at the same time as the advocators. So I want to once again invite anyone in our audience to send in questions for a little Q&A. But our first question is, we have a question from Arla, and she wants to know what is the meaning of the Farsi script at the bottom of your shirt, Rabbi Tarlan. And then I'm also wondering if Houman, you can tell us a little bit about your background as well.
Rabbi, go ahead.
I just responded in the chat for all of our visual learners. It says Zan Zendegi Azadi, which means women, life, freedom. It's sort of one of the main slogans that is really fueling the uprisings, or what the Iranian people are actually asking us to call a revolution now at this point, not a protest, but a full-fledged reform change. And so it begins with, women. If you don't have equality amongst your groups, it's not a good place to live. For that's my simple way of saying it. But back to you, Dr. Sarshar.
Thank you for noticing the background. It's beautiful as it is. It really has nothing to do with anything that's going on in Iran currently. It is a work by a brilliant artist, modernist artist named Reza Mafi, who died unfortunately much too young, very early on in the revolution. I'm also an art collector, a collector of modern Iranian art. This piece sadly doesn't belong to me, but it is one that I use as my backdrop.
Awesome.
And it's illegible Persian calligraphy. You can't really read it. It's not meant to be read.
Beautiful. Thank you. So let's see, we have another question. Oh, yeah. Let's see. So we have another question in the chat. Can you share any action items for us to take away to help spread awareness and keep this conversation in the public eye? Are there any social media accounts you can recommend following and sharing? And I'll add to that also, if there's any books or kind of news sites that you find have been helpful throughout this, the last few months and several years, to be following what's going on in Iran.
I just want to encourage people to reach out to their electeds. We have signed a resolution in the city of Beverly Hills. We were among the first city to have a moment of silence. Our council stands in solidarity with the people of Iran. With that, we tried to bring awareness. Additionally, we have justice for Mahsa Amini. It was lit up on our city council walls, And then we were able to also put it up in a different spot now that we have the holiday decor up. And our council, our mayor, and all of our city council members have been united and speaking out in every opportunity that we have. And I feel that we also spoke up with regard to the UN Council, and every little bit counts, because then UNICEF is now trying to listen with what's happening to the children of Iran, because there's a lot of injustice happening to our young people. And if it was any other country, people would be appalled. A lot of times in social media, I feel like oftentimes we're talking to each other. What happens is the algorithms change and you just speak to each other. So if even one person is able to take a message from tonight and spread it with their own network and their own social media network, that helps to amplify the voice and the message for the Iranian people, that they want justice and they want freedom. I'll let Houman speak more about books. Or
well, in terms of books that can tell you what's going on, you know, I don't know. It's because this really came out of nowhere. The way it's taken shape, I don't know that there's that much that could be helpful out there. But with respect to the takeaway, I, for one, think it's very important for the people outside of Iran to finally and definitively understand that there is a huge difference between the people of Iran and the government of the Islamic Republic. And that the two are so vast, so much apart, that it would be a mistake to try to bundle them into the same net in any way other than the fact that we all speak the same language and happen to have been born on the same, you know, general plot of land on this planet. And with respect to what we can do, you know, like Sharona said, you have to get in touch with your representatives. What Iran needs most, I think, from the Western world is not necessarily so much an intervention as an active dissociation from the Islamic Republic. We need the Western governments to stop dialogue with Iran. We need the Western governments to close every embassy of the Islamic Republic in their countries, and to take actions towards freezing every asset of every Iranian government official everywhere until this thing is resolved. Because the only thing that's keeping them alive and the only thing that's keeping them fighting is the hope to be able to continue to pillage the coffers of the nation in order to fatten their own pockets. And once they see that even that is gone, then it can only help the people of Iran to succeed in the path that only they know best how to define and how to achieve.
Thank you. So we have another question from Arizu, who asks, can the regime change successfully happen without armed protests or support or interference from other governments? And Houman, you were just kind of alluding to this, at least with the West. And I'm curious to hear about other also opinions about this question.
From me or?
Sorry, anyone, open to all. Feel free to chime in.
Goldie, I just wanted to let you know I'm putting some action items in our chat. I don't know if it's going to everyone in general, if somebody wants to put it out there, but these are things that you can do to amplify the voice of Iranian people.
Yeah, we'll grab those from the chat and make sure that we send out a follow-up email to all of our audience members with your suggestions. So thank you. I appreciate that.
You know, at the risk of colonizing the discussion, but please raise your hand and I will happily shut up. I think the Iranians are a little weary of Western intervention, because the fact is that every time the West has intervened in Iran's history, they have made a mess of things. So I don't know about military intervention. I don't know that that's necessarily inevitable, and it's certainly too soon. And I would hate to see this revolution succeed through Western military intervention. I think that for history's sake, for the sake of the Iranian collective, for the sake of the nation that Iran is becoming, it is vital for Iranians to know that this time they built their own destiny. They fought for their own freedoms, they managed to achieve them, and they did whatever they did on their own. Because whenever you ask Iranians, even today, even last night at the panel where the rabbi and I were participating, someone came up to me and complained that you didn't say anything about how Carter ruined all of our lives. Well, I'm not sure that Carter ruined all of our lives. There were millions of Iranians protesting in the streets in 1978. Carter didn't have their phone numbers. He's not the one who asked them to go do it. Iranians did it. So it would be very nice to be able to get to a point in our own history where no one's going to be able to sit around and point a finger to any outsider for having ruined our lives. We know exactly what we need to do. And for the time being, I think the best intervention from the West is for them to cut ties with Iran and cheerlead the people of Iran and be a voice for them, and understand that we want democracy and human rights for every citizen in Iran, in the same way that people enjoy it in the West, in the UK, in France, in Europe, in the United States, and in Canada.
Also, if anybody is interested in contributing, I think you need to be mindful of the organizations, because a lot of people are trying to profit from the situation right now, and it's important to be mindful of that. So I don't have any specific organizations to contribute to, but a lot of times people want to profitize on the on situations like this. So I just want to make sure that people are mindful of which organizations they're giving to. There is some word that some of the organizations that are collecting money now are actually giving the money to the Islamic Republic. So I'm sure that maybe Houman or Tarlan have more information on that.
Yeah, I've been putting stuff in the chat, and then I've realized the chat's not going to the public. So I'm hoping that all of you are going to be able to pass that on as far as social media and all of that. And I defer to Dr. Sarshar, who really understands history, to tell us a little bit about whether arms is necessary or not. I can't tell you anything, and definitely also grew up with the Mordechai Carter, this idea that President Carter was to blame. But I think our history is often sort of just skewed based on certain perspective and understanding, and there's always 90 sides to a story. But I'm hoping, I don't know what else to say, like the tikva, the hope that like putting pressure, whether it's sanctions or, having, one of the handles I gave you was the Iranian Diaspora Collective, people that are really working under the radar, trying to bring electricity back to Iran when Iran shuts it down, or trying to figure out how the internet can shut back on, and even the leaders that Dr. Sarshar was talking about, there's no more leaders in the front row because it's easy to shoot at them and kill them. So there's people working on the back burner, trying to make sure that there's empowerment happening without people figuring out who it is.
Yeah, one thing
very different. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing we tried to be mindful of was, even with regard to our resolution, a lot of times we put sanctions and we're not aware of the impact that it has on the actual people of Iran. So we made sure when we were penning our resolution that we didn't put sanctions on the amount of, for example, people want to send money to their family members, to be able to send in small quantities. We name people by name to make sure to freeze their assets here as well. Because at the end of the day, what hurts the Islamic Republic the most is hitting them in their pocketbooks and not allowing them to move forward in that sense. So
can I ask a quick question? I mean, looking at history, both of you, who was it that helped people get out in 1979 that couldn't? Was it highest? Was it local federations? I mean, it could be that we don't learn about who actually ended up helping people until later. So we are living history after all. Do you have any?
The
I know.
Jewish Federation.
The
Yeah.
Jewish Federation?
The Jewish Federation, after after the execution of El Ghanayan, a couple of months later, they executed another Iranian industrialist named Danyalpour, and the execution of Danyalpour really mobilized the Jewish community in Los Angeles to start their own chapter of the Jewish Federation, which is still active, and to connect with the larger Jewish Federation in the United States, and to send delegates to the White House and request exemption for Jews based on all of the complications that were then happening because of the hostage crisis, to request an actual exemption for Jews, and they succeeded in getting that. From there, I do believe that Hayes did get involved early, very, very early on, and that was the channel. But the first action was through the help of the Jewish Federation, through the White House, the official channels that allowed for an exception for Jewish citizens of Iran.
I'll say that I don't know much, but I do know that history often repeats itself. So I wouldn't be surprised if in 5 years looking back, I hope some of those things might be repeated. So highest Federation.
Thank you. Thank you all for being a part of this very important conversation. And I think a beautiful note for us to leave to end the conversation on is just the reoccurring theme of hope, and how and tikva, and how we can bring that into the advocacy that we are going forth with, through the social media posts that we're posting, through the people that we're following, and just making sure that we're not letting this escape our feeds, and making sure that it's still a conversation here, even if we feel so removed from where it's actually happening. Because as we can see, it is so near and dear to those who are in our community. And it's so important to share our stories and share the stories of those who maybe can't tell them at the moment if they don't have internet or access to the ones that they love. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our three incredible panelists tonight. Like I said, I'm so honored and privileged to be here with all of you, and have a great night to all of our audience members.
Thank you.